One thing I've learned is that if even just one person is positively impacted, it's worth it. Even if they are positively impacted, I never hear about it. It's still worth it because there's so much that can happen when we plant seeds that we may never see the fruit of it. That doesn't mean that fruit's not being produced. It doesn't mean that there's not value. And so if you do the work of really knowing who you are and what it is you're pursuing, then you can create and then just see what happens.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage.
Okay, everybody, let's do some math that doesn't make sense. One man, 0 paychecks, dozens of books, infinite faith. Paul Granger is living proof that the best stories don't follow a formula. He's a full-time volunteer minister in Richmond, Virginia, who writes books that nobody asks him to write, but readers may or may not even know exist, but it's funded by a God who shows up in the strangest ways. And last year, he published a book a month, 12 months, 12 books, not because he had a publishing deal, but because God whispered, "What if you did?" And Paul listened. So if you're listening to these podcasts, we're going to be talking about success, but also faith, and we're going to be talking to somebody who said yes to impossible things and watch them become real. So this is going to be a really fun conversation all about Paul Granger's year of books. Paul, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's great to meet you too, and excited to see where this conversation goes.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have a fun story to chat about, and it's all inspired by your faith and, of course, about your passion for writing. So, really cool. But let's talk about you before we talk about the writing. You've been serving inner city ministries since 2005. So, tell us a little bit about that. What drew you to that work, and how exactly does that inspire your writing?
Yeah. So, what drew me to ministry was all the way back when I was in high school. I grew up in an environment where many people identified as Christian, many people went to church, and it was just kind of what people did. And I realized if this is something that I'm going to claim for myself, if this is something that I'm going to say is important, then it probably should impact my life in some meaningful way.
Right.
And that moment led me to this sense that my life was going to be focused on loving God and loving others. I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. And what it has looked like is nowhere near what I could have expected, which has included for the last 2 decades, just loving my neighbors, serving in different ways, and writing. Uh, and it's all taken a shape that I just, yeah, like I said, would not have expected. But I also feel like it's allowed me to operate in a different way and with a different freedom, because growing up, you're told you better figure out what it is you're going to do. You better figure out what it is that's going to give you the income you need. You better figure out what's going to make you well known, what's going to give you success in life. And committing myself to just loving others as best as I can has freed me from a lot of the metrics that usually bind us. And that's impacted everything from what I do day to day down to what I write.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, clearly it's something that you never really saw coming. It just kind of,
Yeah.
you know, happened to be the path that you took and kind of what you were drawn to is kind of what I'm gathering from that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's wonderful. And yeah, you mentioned a little bit about like, the finance part, which I think as authors we all know it's hard to, make a huge living on a books, but what you're doing is you have support from donors, which really just means you have a lot of faith and vulnerability. So how do you think this financial model has affected your relationship with community and with God and
Yeah.
your writing?
Yeah. That's the hard part about income is when we live in a place where we feel like if I don't have income, I can't make it, which is a logical thing to think,
Of course.
then we're going to often shift what we do, how we think, and even how we engage with others around that pursuit of money. One of the books that I wrote a few years ago is called God Won't Provide: The Lie We Don't Believe We're Believing. And it
Mm.
comes from this idea that people who identify as Christian will say on Sunday that God is a provider, but then live the rest of the week as though it's not true. Yeah, yeah, God provides. But if I don't do this thing and make this paycheck, or if I don't shift my course of life or work 80 hours or, you know, fill in the blank, then I won't get the money I need. And if I don't get the money I need, I won't survive. And when I entered into full time volunteer ministry, I did so knowing I would not get a traditional paycheck, but also with this sense that my purpose was not to treat people as piggy banks, to treat people as sources of money. In fact, the whole fundraising model, I've been trained in a number of different ways. It's like I threw a lot of those out and said, you know what? I feel like I'm just supposed to invite people into this journey that I'm on, and if they want to give financially, then great. If they don't, great, because it's not about money. And
Right.
so that has freed me up since I'm not bound to income to write as I feel led, to write as people invite me to write what I feel like people need to hear rather than I need to write something that I know is going to generate income, I know is going to make money, or I need to push people to buy my book because if they don't, I won't get the money I need. And so it's offer this freedom for money not to be the driver of what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And I guess that's one way that your books came about. So let's transition to that a bit about the
Mhm.
writing process. I mean, take us back to April when you published your fourth book in 4 months and joked, what if I wrote a book every month for a year?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about.
So my self-publishing journey began, I think, in 2023. I had written a devotional that I really wanted to see in physical form. Thought publishing was just out of the question because I thought you would need to have a connection or you would need to have a lot of seed money. And then I discovered, oh, self-publishing, there are ways to do it where you don't have to have front a lot of money.
Right.
And so I had been writing things, and then coming into 2025, I had a collection of blogs that I had written, and I suddenly had this sense, oh, there's a book in that. Like, what if I just compiled these? And so I did that.
Mm.
Then I was wrestling with the concept of joy, feeling like I couldn't find joy no matter how much I was trying to. And so I was like, well, what if I just sat and actually worked through some scripture on joy, wrote it down, and oh, well, that could be a book too. So these things were happening. And then I get to April, and I've been a part of Podmatch for a number of years and had given talks on their podcasting made simple. And I was about to do another talk, and I realized, oh, I could take my past talks, turn those into a book. And it was at that point I'm like, okay, 4 months, 4 books. I had that joking moment in my mind. Oh, what if I just did a book a month? And I did feel this quiet little sense, not an audible voice, not a booming Paul, but this sense of like, well, what if I did?
Yeah.
Paul, what if you did do a book a month? And it was an interesting moment because at first there was this openness to the idea, but then there is this awareness of reality. That's a lot of work. That might actually be impossible. Like, what am I even going to write? But what I've learned in my life of trying to live out my faith and understand my faith is sometimes it's not about understanding, but just taking that next step that you can. And so that's what I did. I said, all right, well, let me step in this direction. The fifth month, May is coming around the corner. Let me just step into that and see. And what I found is that uh, I did not have a game plan for the whole year. It's not like I said, all right, let me map out every single month and what each book is going to be. Sometimes I could project it out, and sometimes things would change, things would shift. Sometimes I would think I'd know what I was going to write, but suddenly another opportunity came about. And so it was less this plan to write a book a month for a year and more this willingness to journey step by step towards this thing that may or may not happen. Uh, I was ready. If I got to 6 months and I was like, okay, that's as far as it's going to go, I was ready to have peace with that because the goal wasn't to produce this thing, but to step in faithfulness. And it's amazing to see what came from it because, again, so much of this was not my plan. So much of this was not on my bingo card.
Right.
And
Right.
yet I got to be a part of it.
Of course. Yeah, well, I mean, it's really a quite the thing to devote yourself to. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's great because you kind of have that model and that setup that allowed you to do so without getting, too distracted with other areas of life.
Hmm.
What I love about that is the way that you found inspiration from materials that you've already written, your blogs, your podcasts. I think the authors listening today can learn from that. If you're not
Hmm.
sure what to write about, well, you probably already have a content bucket already in what you've done in the past in other areas.
Yeah.
Was it challenging to take those materials and turn it into the form of a book? Like, did you have a certain
Mhm.
process for doing so once you had
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so it depended. There were some like the blogs that was actually pretty easy because I had already edited those down for them to even be put out onto the internet. So that was probably one of the easier ones. One of the harder ones was there's a book called Games You Can Pray Now that actually its life started 2 decades ago, over two, almost 25 years ago, when a group of people gathered together and said, well, how can we make prayer accessible for kids? How can we make prayer something families can engage in? And they wanted to come up with these games. And so they had these smattering of games. And then, 2 decades later, a group of us took that and tried to build it out, but it never got to that fully complete book form. And so when I came to this must have been I can't remember now, September or November when I put it out. I I had this thing that I thought was going to be complete, and then I realized this thing needs a tremendous amount of formatting and editing. And so what I thought would be a quick thing became a long thing, and everything in between. Uh, and I feel like part of it is, like you said, this willingness to say, well, I've got this content, or I've got these ideas, or I've got this thing I worked on. Am I willing to see if it can have new life? And then you just take it one step at a time. And this is the beauty of self-publishing is you have this freedom to just try stuff. I have one book that is in the process of being professionally published, and I'm discovering the long journey that something like that takes. Uh, I created it over a year ago, and it's not going to be released until next or August of this year. And there's a whole team working on this part, a whole team working on this part. But with self publishing, you can say, all right, this is something I have. I know it's not perfect. I know it's not pristine, but it is how I feel like it needs to be. And you can put it out into the world and that's a beautiful thing because it takes that pressure off of having to produce something that will be marketable versus producing something that will be authentic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's funny because I was actually talking to somebody who was all about marketing just the other day on this podcast. So it's funny to see two sides of that. The idea of you need to have marketing to make sure that people find your book and read it, which
Yeah.
is a valid point, of course.
Yeah.
But then it's also the other side of it, something that you're finding you want to write about and actually,
Yeah.
have passion for.
And I think that's something that people need to really like hear what you're saying there. It's not that, okay, this is the right way or that is the right way or this is the wrong way. One thing I've learned in life is I'm finding it's less and less about the right and wrong ways to do things and more about are we being authentic in what we are doing? And so if somebody is going into a traditional marketing approach and they're able to be authentic in that, be who they are, know what they're pursuing in that and be true to that, then great. For me, because I know that money is not the goal, there's a lot of traditional marketing things that I just can't do because I would be inauthentic in it or I would be treating people without integrity. And so I'm landing in a different place that for someone else might be very hard to do. And so you've got to know who you are, why you're doing the things you're doing, and let that shape the what of what you do. Otherwise, you're just going to do what everybody's saying, and you may or may not land where you're hoping to land.
Exactly. Yeah, and and clearly that's kind of what drove you throughout this whole thing, and it kind of allowed you to make sure that every book had value and for
Yeah.
you, and that you were passionate about it, and that's kind of what got you through the entire year of books. But
Mhm.
now that the year is complete, would you say that anything surprised you about the journey? What did you learn about yourself or about writing throughout the process?
Yeah. I think I was surprised that it actually happened, that it came through, because there were moments during the year that I'm like, I would come into the start of a month and think, I have no idea. I just don't know what I can write, or moments that I would start to write something and quickly feel like this is not it. Like this, I just had this sense this is not the book. Maybe it'll be a book down the road, but it is not right now. And so the fact that it all came together really did surprise me. I think what also surprised me is, sometimes why we do something, we might not realize the whole why. And part of the why of the year books, I think, was God needed to do some work on me. So there's a lot of what I wrote that wasn't me being an expert and telling people what to think, but more me saying, I'm figuring this out myself. And so there's so much of this that's actually my transparent, vulnerable processing, which then we want guide answer books, but sometimes what we need is journeying books. Like, we don't need the answer. We need to see that someone else is wrestling with this too. We need to wrestle with them because we meet each other in that and find this solidarity, find that we're not alone. Versus when we get an answer, then we can remain alone because now we got what we need. And so to see how my own journey now is able to be a part of other people's journeys was also not surprising, but I was surprised the extent to which God was able to do that. And in such a diverse way, because there's everything from devotionals to like a fiction book about zombies, which was also not on my bingo card. But I talked to someone who was really encouraged by that story of that main character in a zombie book. Uh, and then the other thing that surprised me was there are actually technically 17 books because a friend of mine from Brazil uh, felt like I was inviting her to translate content. And she asked me mid-year, hey, would you be okay with me translating some of these devotionals into Portuguese? And so there's 5 things that she translated. I didn't even see that coming. And so now there are people in Brazil reading this content and elsewhere around the world. And that surprised me too, but it was also encouraging because I would never have been able to do that. I don't speak Portuguese. I only speak English. I'm very limited. But others coming alongside has now opened up more opportunities.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for talking about that and sharing that. And the opportunities is a huge part of that. It's you never know what doors are going to open once you go down that path.
Yeah.
So really cool that you've been through all of that. Um, so out of curiosity, that if people do want to find out about the Era books and check out more about that and to learn about your devotionals and what you've been doing,
Mhm.
where's the best place people to head to?
Yeah. So, what I'm striving to do in my full time volunteer ministry is not even to create content, but to create authentic, accessible spaces for people to process the hard questions of life. I do create a lot based on my Christ following faith, but I also want it to be a space where anybody can feel like they can wrestle and ask questions and process. And so if someone feels like they're in a place where they're like, I'm just trying to figure out life and I don't understand it, that's what I want to create. And people can go to wheredidyousee.god.com to find books, to find videos, to find podcasts. The year of books is at wheredidyousee.god.com/year dash of dash books. But really, if somebody just if what's they need is not there, I want to position myself to be able to meet someone there. I don't want anybody to feel like they are navigating life alone in solitude because that's not actually how we were designed. Belief systems around the world, all of them seem to land on one of these core truths, that is, we were designed for community. And so if I can be a part of helping somebody know that they are not alone, then I want to do so.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that's really inspiring too to hear that. It's not all about just the writing or whatever it is, but about the community behind it is kind of what I'm
Mhm.
gathering. So to transition into like, tips for authors who might be inspired by your story, want to
Yeah.
follow along your path, writing about what you're passionate about, multiple books throughout the year. What advice would you give to those aspiring authors? They might
Yeah.
also be wondering, is it good enough for anybody to read this? Tell us a little bit about what should they know going in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one is there are plenty of limitations and fears in life, and we tend to let those things drive us. If there's one thing that the year of books taught me is that I would never have thought writing a book a month would be a thing. I would never have planned on doing that. And yet here we are. Like, it's happened. Does that mean I'll keep on doing it? Not necessarily, but it does mean there were limitations that I've had throughout the year that have been proven false or limited or incomplete. And so that's what first thing I would encourage people is there are going to be a lot of things that will tell you what can't happen or why it shouldn't happen. Um, take those objectively. Actually put a spotlight on them and find out if those are legitimate. And if they are legitimate, find out if they actually have to be binding, if they have to have power over you. Um, the other thing is what I mentioned earlier about knowing your why. There are a lot of reasons we write. Not all of them are necessarily healthy. So if we can name those ones that might not be healthy, that might be driving us somewhere that ultimately isn't our goal, we can learn to release those. And if there are ones that are healthy, we can learn to lean into those more than we might have otherwise. Um, a lot of us get caught in wanting to have more acclaim, wanting to have more income from it, but most people don't write for that. That's a sub goal, but the main goal is I feel like there's something important that I'm supposed to say, or I love creating and I just want to create. So if your why is that, it actually doesn't matter if anybody reads it. It actually doesn't matter if it produces income because the core why was that you wanted to create. And so that would be the third thing is once you know your why, then lean into that rather than all the other things that people will say. Lean into that rather than the metrics of how many people have purchased, how much has it generated, how well known is my name. Because one thing I've learned for the as long as I've been making content is that if even just one person is positively impacted, it's worth it. Even if they are positively impacted, I never hear about it. That's a harder one. It's still worth it because there's so much that can happen when we plant seeds that we may never see the fruit of it. That doesn't mean that fruit's not being produced. It doesn't mean that there's not value. And so I would encourage anybody who feels uh, this calling to create, there are going to be a lot of voices that will speak into why you should and why you shouldn't, what it's supposed to look like and what it's not supposed to look like. Those voices aren't always true. If you do the work of really knowing who you are and what it is you're pursuing, then you can create and then just see what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said about even if they don't even know if they're impacted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people could be reading it every day, and
Yeah.
in fact, you might not ever know. But if you're listening today, guys, and you are impacted by Paul's work, definitely drop him a message. Maybe like, oh, no, no, but
Encouragement's always nice.
yeah, exactly. But it's a matter of faith, right? Kind of going back
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
you wrote something that means something to you, and it's out there for anybody who might come upon it and whatever path they might be living in life. If they happen upon it, great, and
Yeah.
that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, as we begin to wrap up, then I'm curious if you happen to two questions actually. First off, would you ever do this again? Would you ever consider doing the year of books a second time? Make it a decade of books? I don't know. Or do you think that last year kind of wrapped it up for you? What do you think?
Uh, the first thing that comes to my mind is I want to remain open. Like, do I want to? Not necessarily. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of mental commitment. But am I willing? Yes. And it makes me think of in my podcast, there was a season that I leaned into focused on this idea of healing, both miraculous recoveries, but more often unanswered prayers. And I wanted to just do an episode on that. I felt like God invited me to lean into it. It ended up being 50 episodes, which was amazing. But then once it was done, I'm like, all right, that was a lot of work. I'm done. It's a similar joking moment. I felt like God saying, but are you? Because another opportunity opened to do a series focused on suffering. And I jokingly said to God, okay, fine, I'll do it. But as long as it's not as long as the last one, it ended up being 51 episodes. Would I've chosen to do 101 episodes between these two seasons? No. But am I willing to love others through these spaces that I've been invited to create? Yeah. And so if that means writing another year's worth of books, another decade's worth of books, I want to be willing to say yes to that because what I know is that the purpose of my life is bigger than my comfort, bigger than the fruit that it cultivates, greater than all these things. My life exists to exude love as best as I can. And when I can't, to be willing to be the conduit of a love that's beyond me and greater than me. And so we'll see. Do I have plans to write a book a month in 2026? No, but so much of my life has not been bound by plans. So I'm ready to buckle up and go wherever I need to go.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, just see where life takes you. It kind of as you're going back to the beginning of this podcast too, just kind of following the path that draws you in. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We think we've
Yeah.
learned a ton about your vision, your mission, and everything in between. It's been a pleasure. We
Yeah, it's
appreciate it.
been great. I appreciate you creating the space for this because you're allowing people to share things that are really important to them in a deeper way than just an advertisement on social media.
Mm.
It's no, actually, this is who I am and what I'm doing, and I want to invite people into that. So thanks for creating space for people to do that.
That's really kind of you to say. Thank you. Yeah, no, we needed a chance for people who are passionate about writing and ideas to share it with others. And everybody
Yeah.
listening today, you pick up on a new piece of information every time. And today's message, I think, was, just following your passions and getting it out there. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to meet you, Paul. Thanks for coming
Likewise.
on. And to everybody listening, go ahead and check out all of Paul's work. We're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today. So you can, check out the books. You can learn more about what Paul's up to. And also on social media too, all of the above. And so in the meantime, everybody, keep following your own passions. Find out what your whisper is, that crazy idea that you might have in your heart that you keep dismissing because it doesn't make sense. I mean, Paul heard, "What if you did?" and wrote 12 books in 12 months. So you could do the same thing. All right. So keep writing, keep creating, and keep saying yes to those whispers. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.